You know, it's kind of interesting. I'm gonna try and have a little bit of like humor and stuff with what I'm gonna say here, but it's something where some different ones have asked a question for millennia. Really, if you think about it, somewhat, sure you might just say centuries, but don't forget there's possibly others involved that would ask the same question if you think about it. And I don't want to get all preachy and talk about just the Bible because of the fact that if I do that, there it might kind of have certain ones that feel uh, like I ain't talking to them somewhat. So basically, I'm gonna tell you what it is different ones ask. It's like, who are we? Why are we here? And what is the meaning of life? Right? That's basically what they're asking. You know, is there any reason for us to exist? And that's part of what it is with philosophy sometimes, right? Are we really real? I'll tell you what. Why don't you let me slap you across the face, and you tell me if it feels real. If it doesn't, possibly you don't exist. If you feel it and you don't want me to do it again, we probably exist. If you think about it. You know what I mean? It's something where if you really start to think about, what is the meaning of life? Some look at the Bible and other religious texts and they're like, well, God, or the gods, whatever, put us on earth, right? For their amusement, some say. Really? Amusement? Is you really think they go to all the effort of creating humans just for their amusement and that's it? Some act as if it's because we're supposed to just serve them. But it's interesting, like I said, I don't want to get all into a ton of religious stuff. But if you actually think about it, with some of the different religious stuff, what is it that some of the gods actually ask for? Really, if you think about it, don't they just basically go, "Hey, live your life however you want to"? You know, to, I mean, looking at the Bible, like I said, don't want to get into a ton of religious stuff, but since I'm a Christian, I don't want to speak a ton about other religions that others might feel like I'm infringing on stuff somewhat. Since I have a different religion than them, but realize how it works the same kind of way, somewhat, right? Where if you realize that if God put man on earth, and the only request he had was just don't eat from that tree. That's it. Do whatever else you want. I don't really care. Just don't eat from that one tree. If you eat that fruit, you'll die. And that was basically his only request, wasn't it? Other than be fruitful, become many, fill the earth, and subdue it. Enjoy your lives, have a bunch of babies, have tons of sex, and all that. I'm just telling you, just out of reverence and out of respect, don't eat that one tree, because if you do, you're gonna die. And what's funny too is if you actually look at it, and Satan's like, "Why wouldn't you want to eat it? You know what's good and bad." And sometimes I think God had a sense of humor after it was all done, going like, "Oh yeah, look at them. They're really like us. They're gonna die." Yeah, they didn't listen. So yeah, they're really like us. You can just tell it really helped them. You know what I mean? But that being said, once again, to kind of get back to just some that everybody can kind of like have some kind of something with is the idea that if it isn't just for the amusement of the gods, if it isn't just about having some kind of something where it's servitude of sorts. Because what would God need from a human anyways, right? What if you thought about it more in terms of like parents with their children? Or, for those of you who don't have any kids, possibly like your pet. Possibly even like your friends. Because why do you have friends? What are your friends there for? What is your pet there for? What are your kids there for? What do you do with them? And possibly, I wouldn't even have to answer the question of who you are, why you exist, and what the meaning of life is if you could figure out for yourself why you have friends, why you want friends, why you have pets, why you have children, and possibly in your answering of why you have a pet, why you have friends, why it is you have children, you'll figure out yourself the answer to the meaning of life and why we're here. And then possibly you'll realize what it is that you could do so that your life would actually have a little more meaning to it, possibly. Because if you think about it, what do you do with your kids? I mean, what do your kids do for you? Maybe that's something else. What does your pet do for you? What do your friends do for you? And what do you do for them? And like I said, I don't want to get all religious and stuff, but did you ever think that possibly the same way that you feel about your children, the way you feel about your pets, and the way you feel about your friends, is kind of the same kind of relationship with God? That we give Him a reason to exist, if you want to call it Him, because, it's energy, right? Basically, if you think about it. But that we give God a reason to exist as much as He gives us a reason to exist. And that is the meaning of life. The meaning of life is that we give each other a reason for our existence. Whether you realize it or you don't. Some can't comprehend certain ideas, and some because of imperfection, if you want to call it that, certain genetic disorders and stuff, have difficulties. If you believe in God, then you'd also believe in the devil or some kind of, evil force or something like that, right? And that's why I find it funny somewhat that God is blamed for when someone dies, because it's like, oh yeah, that's really what God wanted, wasn't it? That's why He said, don't eat from the fruit, or that's why certain gods were like, don't do that or you'll die, or so if you realize the difference between like the good gods and the bad gods, right? And so it's just one of those deals where sometimes if you actually think about it for a minute, if you actually start to realize a certain reality in your own family, whether it's your actual family, an adopted family, your friends, your pets, your children. And if you can actually comprehend that idea, if you can figure that out, then possibly you can answer the question yourself. Which is probably better than if I try to answer it for you. Because I can tell you exactly what the meaning of life is and why we're here. But if you can figure it out yourself, it's even better. And you know the reason for that? Because of the fact that there's some stuff that you have to learn, that someone has to teach you. They have to tell you so that you can learn. There's other kinds of stuff that if someone tells you, it isn't the same as when you experience it yourself, when you learn it yourself, when you do it yourself. Now, I have no problems helping to guide you so that way you can answer some of your own questions. If you can actually answer your own questions yourselves, because you actually think about it, Well, that makes you that much smarter. And the smarter you get, the wiser you can get. Because wisdom is applied knowledge. Once you have a certain amount of knowledge, if you apply it correctly, because I mean, let's face it, you could have knowledge, but if you just did a bunch of stupid stuff, it doesn't mean that you're wise. If you have knowledge and you apply it correctly, well, then you have wisdom. And if you want to acquire knowledge and if you want to acquire wisdom, you actually have to start thinking for yourself. And it doesn't mean you can't get guidance. It doesn't mean that sometimes, you don't need someone to teach you how to do stuff. What it means is sometimes you have to actually think for yourself and answer your own questions. Because if you let someone else answer some of those questions for you, and you didn't even have to think about it, how do you know it's the actual answer, or is it that you just accept whatever it is that someone told you? But if you can answer some of those questions yourself, and if I can help guide you to where you can answer those questions yourself, then something altogether different happens, doesn't it? And that's part of the meaning of life. That's part of the reason for your existence. It's what makes you valuable. It's what makes you a human compared to an animal. When you realize animals have a different way of thinking and reasoning, that you can't really reason with certain animals, can you? I mean, you can teach them stuff, right? But have you ever tried reasoning with certain animals? Have you noticed how some animals can't even seem to ask any questions? And when you start realizing the difference between humans and animals, do you really want to just act like an animal? Do you want to feel like, oh, it's part of nature, like some say about certain stuff, right? Well, in nature, blah, blah, blah. Well, are you going to compare yourself to an animal and say that you're an animal, or do you want to prove you're a human that can actually think and reason and, actually has a reason for existence, and that you can dominate animals because you're an actual human? And dominance doesn't mean abuse. So I ain't talking about abusing animals, I'm talking about dominating animals. And there is a difference. So if you can start to figure some of that out yourself, if you can answer your own questions, if you can get the knowledge, if you do some research, and if you really start to use your brain and think for yourself, what could possibly happen? If you really want to, think about possibilities for the future. So, hopefully that helps you somewhat. Like I said, try to have a little bit of a sense of humor about it, even though it's a very serious question, really. And, I wasn't trying to do some kind of comedy show where you're going to fall on the floor laughing and just oh my god, that was hilarious. But still having a sense of humor about it, right? Because if you think about it, some of it's a little bit funny. It's having a sense of humor. It doesn't mean that, it's a comedy show. And when you start realizing certain differences, right? If you can comprehend certain differences, then that can also help you. So you have to realize that when you're looking at stuff, looking at the big picture. You ever seen those deals where they show a square or something like that, and it's got some dots or some lines or some colors or something? And it's what is it a picture of? And I have no idea, right? And then it you look at the big picture. And what's the big picture? And when you realize certain ones, all they do basically is look at the small picture. And they never look at the big picture. And it's you need to look at the big picture. Well, I'm still trying to figure out what the picture is. But that's only a portion of the picture. And they can't seem to comprehend. They can't differentiate. They don't realize that small picture isn't the big picture. That it's just a portion of it. And all they want to do is focus on that little part of the picture. And they're just but that's... whatever it is that they say, and you might go, look, all you have to do is look at the big picture, and you'll figure it out, because it isn't that difficult to figure out, right? And when you realize that if you look at the big picture, and look at all of it, right? Well, then you can actually talk about it, and you can actually have a reference for where that little bit of the picture was from, right? And that could actually help you answer something about that little picture. But if all you're doing is looking at the little picture and you're so focused on it, you're like one of those animals that can't be reasoned with. So ask yourself, do you feel like you're an animal, or do you feel like you're a human being? And if you consider yourself human, what do you need to do to prove it? Do you want to act like animals, or do you want to act like a human? And do you want to have a reason for existence? Do you want to have the capability to answer some of your own questions? Do you want the capability to think and reason? Because strength without any thought to it is useless. Just like, thought without any kind of strength is also useless. I mean, can you imagine if you had thoughts, but you couldn't even use your mouth to communicate? You couldn't use your hands to communicate. You had no means of communication because you had zero strength at all. You couldn't even do eye movements or any of that because there was zero strength. What would happen? Would any of your thoughts be of any value to anyone without any strength? If you wanted to have, agility, but you had no strength and you had no thought, what could happen there? It's like, oh wow, look how fast they're going. Oh wow, I guess they didn't think about the fact there was a wall there, and that was just, oh wow, look at that. Look how fast they're going. Oh, but guess what? Now there's an obstacle in their way, and they can't move the obstacle because they're just really weak. There's all sorts of different stuff that if you start to really think and reason it out. See, some have, even in video games, it's almost like you must choose one kind of, because it's almost like they view it as, well, if we do it a certain way, it overpowers certain types of stuff, and we can't, really, huh? Interesting. So basically what you're saying is if someone has strength, agility, and intelligence, that they're, overpowered, that it's somewhere it's like they're so strong, so smart, and so fast that you don't even want to make a video game that would actually prove that it could actually have balance. Is that basically what you're saying? That the idea that there could actually be something like balance and equality, it doesn't mean exactly the same. I mean, I don't know if you realize it, but there's some games that kind of sort of have something that's a little bit more reasonable with some of that, right? That's why I think some actually enjoy a game like Skyrim, because you can choose certain types of stuff for yourself to strengthen. And you can even have enchanted items that strengthen certain stuff. And when you realize how you can create certain characters for various reasons, some only focus in one area, some focus in multiple areas. But when you start realizing what all it is that a human is actually capable of, and also if you realize some of the differences between real life and video games. I realize I enjoy video games. So, I ain't trying to say that, oh, the video games are stupid, or because the reality is I play video games and I enjoy it. I also have ideas for video games because I enjoy playing video games. Real life, it isn't a video game, is it? It's completely different. I mean, do you want to play a video game that's exactly like real life? I mean, for some, possibly, because for some it's kind of exciting. They have exciting lives and whatever. For others, would you really want to play the life of certain individuals, or would you be like, why did they even make a game like that? So when you start realizing some of the differences, right? When you can comprehend certain ideas, when you realize that equality and, certain ideas as far as, balance doesn't mean exactly the same, then you might start to actually comprehend a little bit more about why we're here and what the meaning of life is. And the more you learn, the more you'll start to comprehend about why we're here and the actual meaning of life. But a good place to really get started that can actually help you figure it out is if you think about your friends, your family, your pets, and why do you have them? What are they there for? What do you do with them? How do they affect you and how do you affect them? And if you start with that idea, that very simple concept, guess where you can go from there? So hopefully, I've helped you answer your own question.